Imagine you're living in a peaceful small town where everyone knows each other. Your neighbor is a model father, a Cub Scout leader, who always smiles and greets you every Sunday morning on the way to church. But behind that friendly face could be a cold-blooded killer. This isn't a horror novel. It's a true story that happened in Big Lake, Minnesota, when a young mother was brutally murdered in her own home. This case shocked the entire community and took nearly a decade to uncover the truth. So who was the killer? And what drove them to commit such a horrific crime? Welcome to the Case Files, where we bring you true crime stories, told with complete detail, authenticity, and depth. Today, we're stepping into the investigative journey of one of the most shocking cases in America during the 1990s. In this episode, we're taking a deep dive into the infamous case of the Big Lake murder. 8 years of silence, one DNA match. This is the story of Linda Jensen, a 39-year-old woman, a loving mother of 2 children, who was raped and brutally murdered in her own home on a February morning in 1992. This case not only left pain for the victim's family, but also serves as a lesson about perseverance, DNA technology, and people hiding behind a perfect facade. Linda Jensen's life, from good girl to happy mother. Linda Elizabeth Halverson was born into a modest family in southern Minneapolis. She had an older sister named Sandy, 5 years her senior. Despite the age gap, the 2 sisters were incredibly close, like 2 perfect pieces of a puzzle. Sandy had light hair, Linda had dark hair. Sandy loved coffee, Linda preferred tea. Sandy ate freely, Linda watched her diet. They were complete opposites, but loved each other deeply. When Linda was 18, she met and fell for a local young man named John Silliman. They got married on April 4, 1971, just 2 months before Linda's 19th birthday. The marriage seemed happy at first, but like many love stories, it didn't last forever. After 7 years together, they divorced. However, the special thing was that they both stayed in touch, without hatred or resentment. Linda then worked as a dental hygienist, a stable job where she was loved by everyone. A few years after the divorce, she began a new relationship with Robert Beard, a local man. From this relationship, Linda gave birth to a son named Joey. But the relationship with Robert wasn't smooth. They argued frequently, and once Linda had to call her sister Sandy, asking to stay at her place temporarily with her son. But then fate gave Linda a second chance. She and John Silliman, her ex-husband, began seeing each other again. The 2 realized they still loved each other. And on the exact anniversary of their first wedding day, they decided to remarry. Sandy, her sister, believed Linda had finally found true happiness again. Not long after remarrying, Linda and Charlie, another name for John, Silliman used in the video, moved to the town of Big Lake, Minnesota. This was a peaceful place, with houses scattered among trees, where everyone knew each other and greeted each other warmly. That same year, Linda became pregnant, and after 9 months, gave birth to a lovely baby girl named Lisa. Linda's life seemed perfect: a loving husband, 2 healthy children, a cozy home. But everything would shatter on one fateful day. Big Lake, Minnesota, a peaceful paradise. Big Lake is a small town in Sherburne County, Minnesota. This is a place where everyone knows each other's faces, where children can play freely on the streets without anyone worrying about safety. The crime rate was very low, and murders were almost unheard of. That's why when tragedy struck the Jensen family, the entire community was shocked and panicked. Linda was a friendly woman who often jogged around the neighborhood and chatted with neighbors. She always smiled, always ready to help others. No one could imagine that one day she would become the victim of a horrific crime. February 24, 1992, the fateful morning. February 24th, 1992 began like any other day in the Jensen household. Charlie left home early in the morning to work for a construction company. Linda stayed home taking care of the two children. She was still breastfeeding Lisa, so she often had to wake up in the middle of the night, making her very tired in the morning. That day they overslept, and Linda had to rush to prepare Joey for school. At noon, Charlie tried calling home many times, but no one answered. Worried, he left work early to check on the house. When he arrived around 4 p.m., Charlie saw Linda's car still parked in front of the house. He heard Lisa crying, and when he entered the house, he saw the baby sitting in the playpen, still wearing pajamas. Linda always changed the children's clothes every morning, so this made Charlie feel uneasy. He searched everywhere and discovered Linda's feet sticking out from behind the bed. She was completely naked, covered with a blanket, and a large knife was stabbed through her body, pinning the blanket to her chest. Linda had been killed. Charlie immediately called 911. His voice trembled, full of panic. "My wife is dead. I just got home, and she's lying in the bedroom stabbed to death. Oh my God!" While waiting for police to arrive, Charlie called Sandy, Linda's sister. The strange thing was that normally only Linda called her sister, never Charlie. He just said, "Linda is gone." Sandy kept repeating, "Find her. Find her." She understood what Charlie was saying but didn't dare believe it. Sandy later recounted that when she heard the news, her legs went weak. She collapsed under the kitchen table and cried out in agony. The crime scene. The first clues. Investigators from the Sherburne County Sheriff's Office quickly arrived at the scene. This was a serious murder. The scene had to be protected and investigated immediately. In the bedroom, Linda's body lay under a blanket, completely naked. She had been stabbed many times, the wounds deep and continuous like being sewn with a sewing machine. Alan Pendleton, the now former district court judge, said, "The victim wasn't just stabbed once, but multiple times in the chest area." While the forensic technician collected DNA samples from the body, detectives searched the entire house. There were no signs of forced entry. The belongings were neat, seemingly not ransacked. However, the bedsheets in the bedroom had disappeared. This was an important detail showing that the perpetrator wanted to erase all traces. The knife stuck in Linda's body was a steak knife from the kitchen. If the perpetrator had planned ahead, they would have brought a weapon. But if it was a spontaneous act, they would use anything at hand. From the stab wounds, it was clear the perpetrator acted with extreme rage. This was not a random crime. The autopsy results showed Linda didn't die from being stabbed. In fact, she was strangled to death first, then stabbed afterward. There wasn't much blood at the scene, which matched the forensic conclusion. More importantly, experts discovered semen in the victim's body, confirming Linda had been raped. However, in 1992, DNA technology was still primitive. The semen sample collected wasn't large enough to identify the perpetrator with the technology of that time. Having DNA but not knowing whose it was also useless. Questioning neighbors and seeking witnesses. Since there were no signs of forced entry, police believed the perpetrator was someone Linda knew, at least someone she trusted. They began questioning neighbors. Linda was a friendly woman who often jogged around the area and chatted with everyone. No one had any ill feelings toward her. Detectives turned to determining the time of the crime. The autopsy determined Linda died between 8 and 10 a.m., but unfortunately, no one heard or saw anything suspicious. With no witnesses, police had to rely on forensic results and began investigating potential suspects. First suspect, Charlie Jensen. Just 4 days later, Linda's funeral was held. Sandy shared through tears. "When my mother gave birth to Linda, she told me, 'You're the older sister. You must protect your younger sister.' But I couldn't protect Linda. While family members mourned, police began suspecting Charlie, the victim's husband, the first person to discover the body. According to investigation protocol, the person who discovers the body is always under suspicion. Charlie was invited to the police station for questioning. During questioning, police didn't just listen to statements, but also observed facial expressions and body language of the suspect. They asked Charlie to recount every detail from waking up to calling 911. Charlie said he left home early in the morning. At that time, Joey was still at home. Then he went to Rogers to get construction materials, and then went to work at a construction site in Maple Grove, east of Minneapolis. Charlie said he couldn't contact his wife after going to work, despite calling many times from 9:30 a.m. Police planned to check phone records and verify Charlie's route. Did he have time to return home to commit the crime? They traced his morning route, calculated travel time, but still couldn't be certain. If Charlie was the perpetrator, there needed to be a motive. They knew the two had divorced and then remarried, so they investigated the relationship more deeply. Call logs confirmed Charlie's statement. He had called home many times from work. Sandy, Linda's sister, once had a husband who was a homicide investigator, so she understood clearly that most victims know their killer, but she firmly believed Charlie couldn't do it. Sandy was adamant that her brother-in-law could never harm Linda. Charlie asserted his innocence and was willing to take a polygraph test. The results showed he was truthful. Additionally, his work records and his route that day all checked out. Police also asked Charlie to provide a DNA sample, and he agreed immediately. Finally, investigators concluded that Charlie had no motive to kill his wife and removed him from the suspect list. Second suspect, Robert Beard, Joey's father. Police shifted focus to another name, Robert Beard, Linda's ex-boyfriend and father of her son, Joey. Charlie recounted that 2 weeks before the crime, Linda had argued with Robert over the phone about child support. Robert was hot-tempered with violent tendencies. Could he be the one who did it? Police summoned Robert for questioning. He denied any involvement and said that day he was home alone, had no car, no driver's license, and Linda's house was too far to walk. No one could confirm his statement. Being alone at the time the victim was killed, that was a suspicious sign. When the investigator asked, "What do you think your son would feel knowing you killed his mother?" Robert fell silent and demanded to see a lawyer, another bad sign. Police suspected he was the perpetrator, but there was no direct evidence. They requested Robert provide a DNA sample. Results showed Robert's DNA didn't match the semen sample collected at the scene. The case hit another dead end. Third suspect, John Silliman, ex-husband in California. Police also investigated John Silliman, Linda's first husband, who divorced her in 1978. However, John was living in California and had a solid alibi. He was teaching at school at the time of the crime. John also agreed to provide a DNA sample, and the results didn't match. Clue from a witness, the mysterious pickup truck. After police appealed to the public for information, a new witness came forward. This woman said that morning she saw a man leaving the Jensen house right at the time of the crime. This person was driving a green pickup truck. She wasn't home when police knocked on every door, so she only reported now. Police asked the witness to describe the driver. They checked all of Linda's acquaintances with matching appearances, but no one fit. Finally, they released a composite sketch of the suspect. However, the man's face was too ordinary, with no distinctive features, no scars, no eye patch, nothing easily identifiable. There were thousands of people around here who looked like that. No one called, no one recognized that person. Investigators didn't want to ignore this clue. They continued questioning the witness. Unfortunately, when asked again, the woman began contradicting herself in her statement. At first, she said the truck was green, then later said it was brown. This made police suspicious, because truthful testimony doesn't change erratically like that. Still, they believed this woman truly saw someone near Linda Jensen's house and was trying to help. But human memory is very complex, and such troubles with witnesses are understandable. The Silent Years, 1992 and 1999. In the summer of 1992, a few months after the crime, the investigation was suspended due to lack of evidence. Police had no other leads. Linda's family grew increasingly anxious. They wanted answers. Who could commit such a crime in such a peaceful place? Who could murder a young mother right in front of her daughter? In Sherburne County, murders were rare. All of Linda's neighbors were shocked. They lived in worry, but no more clues emerged. But Sandy, Linda's sister, didn't give up. She called the police station 3 to 5 times a week, just to remind them she was still waiting. She didn't just mourn, she fought. Once, she brought a photo of her sister to the police station and said, "This is my sister, work for her." Then left the photo there as a reminder. For 7 years, Sandy kept calling, kept reminding, wouldn't let her sister's case sink into oblivion. Turning point in 1999, new sheriff and determination to solve the case. By 1999, a new sheriff was appointed in Sherburne County, Bruce Anderson. He decided to put the Linda Jensen case at the top of the priority list. Bruce was one of the first investigators to handle the case in 1992. When he became sheriff, he made a determined statement. "I won't retire until this case is solved." He formed a task force and assigned the entire matter to them. The first thing the task force did was re-examine the DNA sample collected from the scene. By then, 7 years had passed, and in those 7 years, DNA analysis technology had advanced tremendously. The small semen sample that was previously insufficient for analysis could now create a complete DNA profile. Police proceeded to compare with over 80 DNA samples, including Charlie Jensen, Robert Beard, John Silliman, and many others who had been suspected. But none of them matched the DNA of the person who raped and killed Linda Jensen. The search hit a dead end again. Year 2000. Clue from the gym. Police again appealed for help from the public, while also offering a reward. They cooperated with media outlets, hoping someone, even with just a small detail, would come forward. And then an anonymous call came in. This man said that on the exact day of the crime in 1992, he overheard a conversation at the gym. A person named Richard Christopherson was talking about Linda's murder. Police discovered Richard and Linda had worked out at the same gym. They might have talked. When questioned, Richard admitted knowing Linda and once gave her flowers even though he knew she was married. Police suspected Richard might have gone to Linda's house, been invited in, then forced himself on her and killed her. Richard agreed to provide a DNA sample. The result? No match. The case hit another dead end. The call from Angela Hennon, the fateful testimony. A few months later, a new witness came forward, and this time, this was the key that unlocked the truth. A woman named Angela Hennon called police. She stated that in the 1990s, she had an extramarital relationship with a man named Kent Jones, a resident living only about a mile, about 1.6 kilometers, from Linda's house. Angela recounted that on the exact day the crime occurred, when they were both watching the news about Linda's murder on TV, Kent suddenly became angry in an unusual way. Angela had asked Kent about Linda. At first, Kent said he knew her, but then denied it. Why did he change his statement like that? Angela broke up with Kent not long after and kept the secret for 8 years. Now, she couldn't stay silent anymore. She believed Kent was involved in Linda's death. Kent Richard Jones, hiding behind the moral mask. Police began investigating Kent Richard Jones. They discovered a shocking profile. Kent had a wife and 4 children. He was the leader of a Cub Scout group. He regularly attended church, appearing to be very devout. On the surface, he was a model father, a kind neighbor, a pillar of the community. But when digging deeper, police discovered Kent had also been accused of domestic violence. Kent had told police in 1992 that he didn't know Linda, but his own wife said that Linda had come to their house to ask about Joey joining the Cub Scouts. When confronted with this contradiction, Kent suddenly remembered and said, "Oh, that's right." But why had he lied before? Police requested a DNA sample, and Kent Jones did something that none of the over 80 people suspected before had done. He refused. That was an extremely suspicious sign. Alan Pendleton, the former district court judge, recalled, "He was the first man to refuse DNA testing. That raised huge suspicions. The court immediately issued a warrant to compel the sample. Investigators waited anxiously for the results. And when the results came back, they had the answer after nearly 9 years of searching. The DNA matched 100%. Kent Richard Jones was the one who raped and killed Linda Jensen. Motive for the crime: from fantasy to tragedy. According to the investigation, Kent Jones had previously contacted Linda, possibly while she was jogging through the neighborhood. He had fantasies about her and decided to turn them into reality. On the morning of February 24, 1992, after Charlie went to work and Joey went to school, Kent went to Linda's house. There were no signs of forced entry, meaning Linda had opened the door for him. Perhaps she thought he came to talk about Joey joining the Cub Scouts. But Kent had other intentions. When Linda rejected him, he flew into a rage. He strangled her to death, then raped her corpse, then used the steak knife from the kitchen to stab her many times to cover up the crime. He took the bedsheets to erase traces, but left behind a DNA sample, the final evidence that would convict him. For 8 years after that, Kent Jones continued living a normal life. He still led the Cub Scout group, still went to church, still smiled at neighbors. No one suspected that behind that moral mask was a cold-blooded killer. First trial, November 2001. In November 2001, Kent Jones was brought to trial on 3 charges: first-degree murder, second-degree intentional murder, first-degree criminal sexual conduct. He defended himself by saying the two had consensual sex the day before, February 23rd, not the day of the crime. According to Kent's theory, that was why his DNA was in Linda's body. But forensic examination clearly proved the victim was raped and murdered at the same time. Scientific evidence couldn't be refuted. The trial lasted many days with numerous witnesses, forensic experts, and DNA evidence. Sandy, Linda's sister, sat in the courtroom every day, looking straight into the eyes of the man who killed her sister. On December 8, 2001, after only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kent Jones guilty on all 3 charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the end of the trial, Sandy, the victim's sister, told the media, "I don't want him to be allowed to see his family when he took my sister away from me. I want him to live his whole life in darkness, alone." Appeal and second trial, 2004-2006. However, the story wasn't over. In 2004, Kent Jones won an appeal and was granted a retrial. This was a huge shock to the victim's family, who thought justice had been served. In November 2006, in the second trial, Kent Jones changed his statement. This time, he said the consensual sex occurred on the morning of the crime, February 24th, not the day before as he had previously stated. But the forensic evidence remained unchanged. The strangulation marks, stab wounds, DNA sample in the victim's body all pointed to one conclusion: Linda Jensen was raped and murdered. Once again, Kent Jones was convicted on all 3 charges, life in prison. He appealed a second time in 2008, but was rejected. Present day, Kent Jones in prison, awaiting parole. Today, Kent Richard Jones is serving his sentence at Minnesota Correctional Facility, Stillwater in Bayport, Minnesota. He will be eligible for parole in 2030, 38 years after committing the crime. But Linda Jensen's family has vowed they will fight to the end to keep him in prison. Sandy continues to monitor all developments related to the case, ready to confront Kent at any future parole hearings. The Linda Jensen case is clear evidence of many important lessons. 1. The perseverance of the victim's family. Sandy never gave up. For 7 years, she called 3.5 times a week to remind police. This very perseverance kept the case from sinking into oblivion. She proved that justice doesn't come by itself, but must be demanded, fought for, and preserved. 2. The role of DNA technology. In 1992, DNA technology wasn't advanced enough to analyze small samples. But 7 years later, science had progressed. DNA technology itself exposed the perpetrator after nearly a decade. 3. Be wary of good people. Kent Jones wasn't a stranger. He was a neighbor, a community pillar, a Cub Scout leader, a churchgoer. On the surface, he was no different from kind, exemplary people in society. But hidden behind that moral mask was a monster. This case reminds us to be vigilant with those hiding behind kind faces. Killers don't always show it on their faces. Sometimes they live right next to you, shake your hand every Sunday at church, and smile at your children on the playground. 4. The importance of speaking up. Angela Hennon had stayed silent for 8 years. But when she decided to speak up, her testimony opened up the crucial lead. Sometimes, small details we think are unimportant are actually the key to exposing a killer. Linda Jensen, symbol for forgotten victims. Linda wasn't just a victim of violence. She's also a symbol for many women who have been and continue to be targets of those called acquaintances, neighbors, kind people, but in reality predators in disguise. What makes the case even more haunting is the presence of Lisa, the victim's daughter, an innocent child who was in the house when her mother was murdered. We don't know how that memory will haunt her for the rest of her life, but surely it's a wound that will never heal. The result of the life sentence without parole can't bring Linda back, but it's a victory for truth, partial liberation for the victim's family, an affirmation that no matter how much time passes, justice can still arrive, as long as there are people who don't give up. The Linda Jensen case ended after nearly 9 years of investigation. From a fateful February morning in 1992, when a young mother was brutally murdered in her own home, right before her baby's eyes, until December 2001, justice could finally speak. This story isn't just about a brutal crime. It's about perseverance, about the dedication of investigators who didn't give up, about scientific progress, and most importantly, about a brave woman named Sandy who dared to speak up, dared to keep the flame of hope alive despite being forgotten. In today's society, this case is a powerful reminder. Be vigilant with those around you, even good people. Listen to women when they speak up. Trust in science and technology. And most importantly, never give up in the fight for justice. If you're following the case files, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next shocking cases. Because behind every crime is a truth waiting to be uncovered. And if you or someone you know is in danger from domestic violence, call the hotline immediately. Don't stay silent. Your voice could save a life. See you again in the next episode of the Case Files.